Hi everyone, thank you for tuning into the video. So I'm going to get started now on the Build Your RPG from Scratch tutorial series that I'm working on. Basically, I've been using the Invector template for a while, and I am going to be building an RPG, but I thought my skill levels, I'm quite, not really a novice even, I'd actually say I'm quite an amateur at it. But I wanted to go through the process and basically record it and explain as I'm going along, so that everyone else who is sort of new to video games development or wants to use the template and things like that can actually see step by step how I've gone from beginning the project through to what I hope is the end and a release. So yeah, as it is, I'll be using the Invector shooter template. Now this is part one, so I'm just going to talk about the pre-planning for the moment. I won't be getting into too much of the actual technical detail until we get there, but I just wanted to go over a few things. Alright, so planning. So one of the big things that I've spoken about in the past, especially on the forums, about where video games development, especially for a hobbyist, is trying to figure out what it is that you're actually trying to make. If you're coming into doing video games, you might have played a video game. I see quite a lot. Some of the new Zelda games, a lot of young people are playing that and thinking it's the greatest thing, so they want to get into video games development and make their own Zelda. I mean, I know I did when I first played A Link to the Past. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. One of the big problems though is that people can come in and then realise how in depth that game, those types of games are, and how developing it can take a long time, and it can put people off. One of the big things that you need to sort of think about when you're going into planning, or if you want to get into video games development, is you need to think about what it is that you're actually trying to make. Are you trying to make a full-fledged game? Are you trying to make a tech demo? Do you have a really good idea for a story? Do you have a really good idea for a video games mechanic that you want to see out there? Are you basing it on a game that you've played? Are you trying to make like an homage or just a tribute to a type of game? Basically defining that in your head as you go into it is basically the beginning of solidifying the image in your mind of what you want to make, and it's really important that you get that down pat as the first step, because you need to build from that in order to concentrate on what it is that you're doing. Can you achieve it? So yeah, I mean, this one here, I say anyone can really get into video games development. You don't need to have a very strong knowledge in it. There's a lot of assets and things like that there with Unity in the asset store. There's a lot of template assets, like I'm using one now, that takes a lot of the bulk out of it, and you can pretty much just modify those things with art assets and a little bit of know-how in order to get something that's playable, something that you can show to people, and something you can build from. And there's assets out there that actually teach you how to do things as well. So there's a lot that you can do without coming in without any skills at all. One of the big things that I do say though is that you should at least get a base knowledge in Unity at least, and maybe C# or Java or whatever it is that you use to code, but also getting a little bit of your head around games development in general as well. There's plenty of tutorials on YouTube. I mean, hey, you're watching one now, that's great. But there's plenty of other tutorials out there where you can get a little bit more of a wider variety of information. Anyone can achieve, yeah, perfectly fine. But just think about what it is that you're trying to make and what your skills are, and aim for something that's based around your skills, or at least set in your mind that you can achieve it by learning. So be prepared that you will have to learn along the way. Why are you doing it? So this is another one as well. This actually ties into another point that I've got on another slide, but are you doing this because you, like I said earlier, you like a game, you make your own version of that game? Maybe you like that game but you wanted to add a new mechanic that you thought might be really cool to have. Are you doing it because you want to make money? Are you doing it because you just love the art for it? Figuring that out in your head, it sort of helps again develop that concept in your mind of, I'm doing this because I love to do it. Be prepared though as you're doing it to stop loving it, because it'll be a very trying process at times. You'll be hitting your head against a wall trying to figure out why something's not working. You might drop it because you lose interest. You'll come back a bit later and then come back with the answer or to the problem that you had. Anyway, so figuring out why you're doing it, what's your motivation for it, solidifying that, and then basically leveling that up with, again, balancing that with the can you achieve it, why you're doing it versus can you achieve it. The reason why you're doing it will help sort of motivate you along the way of being able to achieve it. So again, another part of the process, as I said earlier, are you developing a game or a tech demo? This is actually an interesting point that I've come across, because there's plenty of times where I've had ideas that will make a really cool game, but there's no real change to the mechanics of any other RPG or any other game that's already currently popular. Are you just trying to emulate that game but put in your own story, or make your own fan fiction of it, basically? Which is all perfectly fine. You can make a game out of that. You've got a really cool story that you want to get out there. But then there's the other side of it, where are you making a tech demo? So you might come up with a really good idea of, hey, this would be a really cool game mechanic, or I'm playing this game now and I really wish it allowed me to do this, and it's not something that I've seen before in many other games or any other games at all. So you got to sort of look at that and go, well, if I've got a really cool game mechanic, am I actually trying to make a full video game based around that mechanic, or can I just get away with making a tech demo, which is basically, here's the mechanic, here is how it plays, there's no real story based around it, but then you can put that tech demo up so that other people can see it and maybe integrate that into their games, or help you devise a game that would actually fit. Because there's no point in basing a game around a game mechanic. I never find that is worthy of actually developing a full game from there. While some of the game mechanics might be really awesome, the problem is that developing a game around it is, a very high chance of failing to be any kind of good, because if you're constantly doing the same thing for a game, it just becomes repetitive and boring. Obviously, the games like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, as your game mechanic is that it's 100 people or teams of 4 in 100 fighting to the death. That's technically a game mechanic, or that's like a set of game mechanics that play together, and that's got no story or anything based around it, but that works because of some magical reason. I can't go into that. But that's good. But that's sort of an example of how an actual game mechanic can be developed into a game. But say if you've got something like, I'm playing an adventure game, and it'd be really cool if I had a mechanic where something like Bionic Commando, where I've got an arm that shoots out and lets me swing across here and there. That's cool. But to develop a game around that mechanic is just backwards thinking. You need to develop a game and then have mechanics put into it to enable the player to go through that story or to go through that game and witness the art of it. Which brings me on to the next point, art or income. So this is one where you basically have to decide: are you doing it because you want to actually portray a story? You want to tell a story. You want to portray a series of events in a way that entertains people. You want to get it out there because it's your artwork, or are you doing it for an income? So are you putting it out there just to make money? Now, there's doing and froing on this. I mean, neither of them's really wrong. I think that doing it just for the money will be the worst option for you, because then you're doing everything of balancing up the time that you're spending on it versus the return value, which can kill a lot of projects because obviously there's a lot of effort and there might be quite minimal return. Whereas if you're going into it with an art thing of, this is my art piece that I want to put out there, I'm going to pour all my effort and time into it, and I don't really care about how much income I get as a return because this is my art product. So there's definitely two different minds of how to think of it. Of course, you can always do your art product and then still make an income on top of that, but you need to sort of figure out in your planning phase, what am I actually working towards here? Am I trying to make money from this, or am I just doing it because it's fun? Which sort of leads into the next point as well, which is the hobby or professional. I'm a hobbyist myself. I've already got a job. I don't need extra income, or I don't need to do this as a job. I'm not looking to get a job in the games industry. I do it because I do enjoy making video games. I enjoy playing them. I enjoy making them. I enjoy making these tutorial videos as much as they're a pain in the bum to edit anyway afterwards. But yeah, I enjoy doing it, so I do it as a hobby. But you might be doing it because you're starting out in the video games industry and you see as it can be quite difficult to get into. There's a lot to learn. You need to get a lot of accreditation. But then there's also, on the other hand, a lot of indie developers that do get a little bit of accreditation, but then they go on and they make their goldmine video game, which puts them up to high popularity, and then they start a profession out of that. There's been a lot of people that have gotten rich out of video games. So you can still be a professional and an artist, or you can still be a hobbyist and earn an income on the side, like that sort of thing. Those two intermix, but they do connect together with basically your mindset going into the developing a video game. So getting onto the actual system of planning. So now that you've sort of worked out your base reasons for why you're trying to make something, you have an idea in your head about what you want to make. You need to start writing down your ideas. You can write it down in many ways. You can do dot points, you can brainstorm, you can write it up on a computer document, let it sit there, you can go on the forums, you can chat to people, develop them like that. But basically you just want to record your ideas, because after however long that it takes to start coming up with ideas, you'll end up forgetting them. You'll get things muddled up, you'll start coming up with new ideas, and it'll push out the old ideas that you had, and you'll lose track of where you are. So it's always good to actually record your ideas in some method, so that you can actually push forward with your project. Once you've got all those ideas set down, you need to figure out what do you need to achieve them. Video games development now is actually a lot easier than what it used to be many years ago. Back then you needed to have a very high level of knowledge of computer programming and development and design. Now you've got things like Unity, where there's game development's sort of opened up more. You've got templates, you've got all sorts of other assets that are out there that can help you develop the game a lot faster than it would if you were developing it beforehand, years past. So what do you need to achieve them? You can sort of look at your ideas and you go, okay, well, look, I'm an artist, I can do a lot of the graphics and the artwork, but I don't really know much about coding, so you're going to have to start looking towards templates and things like that, tutorial videos and lessons in order to learn how to pick up for your shortfalls, right? Maybe you're not an artist, maybe you're a coder and you don't really know much about art, so you can get placeholder artworks, or you can get artworks that you can get on the asset store to make your game with, and you use your strengths of coding to be able to develop a system. So there's all sorts of things. You just need to sort of sit there, look at your ideas, think about your level of capability, and what you need to push those ideas through to fruition. How do you get there? Well, this is, again, the next part. You need to sort of plan, okay, well, how do I get there? Do I buy these assets? Do I do it over a space of time? Do I have an actual restriction of time? Should I sit down and do these tutorial things first? Should I go and actually pay to do a course and learn how to do things to cover those areas that I don't really know about? You can start sort of thinking about that and how you want to go about it. Also figure out how you want to plan for the game. So that involves things like writing up game development documents or design documents. Basically going from playing out your actual steps, and you can even, if you want to throw around there, to start doing milestone things. So you can go, I want a 6-month development time frame, I'm going to have 1 month of pre-planning and writing up documents, then I'm going to do this and that. Just figure out how to get there. Once you can start sorting that out in your head, you'll get into the mode of actual development, of the development process. So now we get on to the item that you're going to take. So I'm doing this one based on the idea of that you're going for a game, not really a tech demo. A tech demo is pretty self-explanatory. You pick your game mechanic and you go from there. You go, okay, well, I'm going to need this, this, and this. You don't have to worry about developing a story or developing a theme or anything like that. You just need to figure out the technical aspect of getting your mechanic out there. So for the rest of this will actually be about developing a game. So the way I like to do is I actually like to pick a theme first. Some people might want to do a story first, and then from that story you can base a theme around it. I particularly like picking the theme first because I can pretty much come up with a story for any kind of theme. But one good way is picking a theme so I know where to start my story or where to base the story and what to draw from in order to fill that story out. So picking a theme could be anything from you want to pick I want a fantasy setting, I want a more realistic medieval setting, or I want a futuristic or a sci-fi setting. I want to go with cyberpunk, or I want to go with orcs and goblins and all sorts of crazy mystics. Once you pick that theme, you can pretty much from there go on to develop a story. Now, The other thing I don't think I touch on in this, picking a theme as well can involve the aesthetics of your game. So if you've already got an idea in your head, say you're basing your game off a game that you've already played. So you play something like Zelda and you like the kind of cartoony graphics, or maybe you like the more HD like realism graphics that you see in a few of the other fantasy games, more like The Witcher. So that there in itself is actually a theme as well. You can go for the aesthetic theme, like I want the visuals to look like this. This is important, like when you start looking at things. So, as it is with me, I'm not really great at 3D modelling anymore. In fact, I'm not good at most of the game development stuff. So I like to pick bits and pieces out of assets and learn how to use them. But there's plenty of asset sets out there with their own visual aesthetic, and you can go from that and develop a game from there. Such as what I'm going to be doing from this one. I'm going to be using a lot of the polygons. That's the low poly fantasy medieval stuff. So that's what my theme for the game is going to be. And then from that I can develop a story. So yeah, have a look around at some of the assets about based around the ideas that you have, and then sort of pick an aesthetic that you want to go for, because that'll help you narrow down what assets you want to actually get, or what assets you want to, or how you want to tailor your assets so that they all match together. Because that is one big thing, especially if you're going for free or purchased assets for art assets. You need to make sure that they actually match each other as part of the aesthetic, because you can buy 3 different hand-painted low-poly models and they will all look completely different as though they're from a different game, and then that won't work for you because it'll look like you've just jumbled everything together. So you need to make sure that they all match. That's something that will come along with a little bit later on. So creating your story. So from that you've got your theme, you've got your basic idea of what you want to develop. Now you need to create your story. One thing you can do with this is actually you can disconnect this from your game. If you know a bit about creative writing, you can actually develop a story outside of video games development. Just write a story about a couple of characters or one character and the adventure that they go on, or anything like that. It doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. You can always just have basic points for your story. Put that together. Once you've got that, you can bring it back into the game development cycle and just have a look at how it would match in to making a video game, or the particular theme, or the what you're trying to create with your video game, the game mechanics, all that sort of stuff that you want to try and replicate. So you look at that story that you've made and you figure out what it is in the video game, how you want to portray that story as a video game. So again, you tie that in with your game mechanics of what kind of features you want in the game in order to help push that story along, or to help portray that story to the players. Once you've got that sorted, or at least a basic understanding of that, you can start actually developing the world. Now I don't mean putting the world together with the 3D art assets and developing your levels, things like that. I'm more talking about actual fleshing out the background of the story that you've created. One of the big things with RPGs is attention to detail. So you need to have that backing there in order to increase that depth. When you look at games like The Witcher 3, there's so much to do. There's like a really one singular storyline that you can go through that will be really in depth and really entertaining for people to watch. But then of course you walk around and all of a sudden there's like 50 million other storylines that you can follow, and each one of them has depth. The reason for that is that they've got such a fleshed out and developed world in the background that runs. The more you can explore that world that you're in with other characters, other stories, other areas, all tying in together, the greater amount of depth you'll have in your game world, and the more you can portray that in your game. A lot of the older games where they didn't really have much power to sort of push the sort of limitations that we had on computer games and gaming in general. You'd have your straight run from this end of the map to the other end of the map, and that's it. That's the level that you've played through. We're now getting into, we've already gotten into the stage where we can actually flesh things out a lot more. We have more power to play with, and we can really develop these engrossing stories. So you can do that with your game, even at an independent level, because you do have those tools at your side to be able to flesh those things out and throw little bits and pieces in there that fit the theme of your world. They fit the general goings on in your world, but they might not be part of your main story that you've got for your characters, but they're in there and they give more depth to the world. So it's always good to actually flesh that out. Oh, excuse me, I've gone the wrong way. Right, so now you got through that, you need to start thinking about seeking help. So you might be working by yourself, and you just got an idea that you want to run with. You might be good enough to be able to pull it off. You might not be good enough. You might be just starting out and you don't really know much. It's always good to join a community. One of the big things with the template that I'm using is the Invector template. They've got their own forums. They've actually got a community of people that have bought the product and are like talking to each other about their developments, coming up with some of the bugs or some of the problems that they're coming up with, and talking about it and seeking help. There's a lot of people on the forums there that do help each other out, and as soon as you bring up, oh, this is an issue I had, hey, I've had that issue too, here's the fix for it. So it's really good to actually find help, especially for certain assets that you're using if you're coming across bugs or problems that you don't know how to figure out. The other aspect too is maybe you want to work as a team. Working as a team is actually really good because it takes a lot of the load off the individual developer. You might be strong at something, but you're not really good and you don't have time, or you don't really want to sit through a bunch of tutorials about how to do something that you don't really have much interest in. So it's always good to team up with someone else who does have an interest in that stuff or does have strengths in that area. And that's perfectly fine. One of the only real drawbacks to working in a team is that you need to have that unified focus on the product. If you've come up with an idea for a game that you want to put through there and you've got the whole story and everything fleshed out, you're going to end up having problems with working with other people because they might have another idea about how to take something. You might want to get something out of let's say you've got a game mechanic and you want it to run this way, but then they tell you that through their expertise that sort of thing's very hard to do, or they're not going to be able to achieve that, and then you've got to work through that together. So you need to be able to communicate with each other and come up with like a joint concept for something that you can put together and something that everyone's happy with working on. Otherwise, you're going to end up with issues with people pulling out, and projects will die from separation from teams, things like that. So it's always good an idea to really sit down before like everything with people that you want to work with and just say, all right, let's brainstorm, let's come up with an idea together that we can all be happy with and all hopefully stick to. Which comes into the next point as well. So for both teams and for individual developers, adhering to your plans. This is a big one. A lot of people will go through, and again, they'll have a really cool idea for a game. They'll start getting into it. They'll start doing things, and they'll hit walls. They'll come up to something that they can't really fix, or they don't know how to fix, and it is actually really demoralising and really draining to hit these things and not know how to fix them and be waiting there for help, or trying to figure something out or waiting for someone to get back to you about something. It can actually really draw your motivation away from continuing projects because you've got those other ideas burning through that you want to try and push out there, but because you're stuck on something else, you can't get those through, and it just gets frustrating, and you can give up. And a lot of times people do just give up and move on to something else. What you need to do is you need to be able to actually stick to your plans, and that's all based on what was being talked about before, where you come up with your themes, your story. You write down your ideas. Make sure you write them down. Because, again, this ties into adhering to your plans. If you write down your ideas and you've got plans of how to put them together, the best thing you can do is to stick to those plans so that you keep that motivation going. You go, okay, this is why I'm doing it. This is what I want to do. I'm going to stick to this. So once it comes out, I'll have achieved something and it'll feel great. Having said all that, though, you're still going to have to adapt. So there are going to be things that you won't be able to stick to, things that you are going to have to be flexible on, especially if you are working with a group. You're going to need to figure out what's the most important, or the core values of the idea, or the core ideas of what you're trying to develop, and you'll need to stick to those, but then other things you can be flexible on. So it's always good to have a wide variety of things so that there are things that you sort of compromise on. Because there are going to be ideas that you have that just won't be feasible. They might not be able to coexist with the other ideas in your game. There might be things that contradict each other. There might be things that are just actually technically not feasible. So adapting to change is one thing. Also, if you are dealing with systems, so like you're dealing with assets that get updated all the time, you may have to actually change those, and that may remove something that you are currently working with. So you need to sort of figure out of what you're using, if you're using other assets, especially systems, whether you're happy with actually just sticking with the iteration that you started with, or whether you are happy to sort of compromise and go through some of the updates that they have, and that might change bits and pieces that will cause you to have to change some of your game mechanics. So yeah, you do have to be open to some change, but the best way is to try and stick to your core plans or your core values. The further you can hold that, the better chance you have of remaining motivated. Anyway, so that's a little bit there about the pre-phase planning. I don't have any design documents to show at the moment for the game that I'm going to be working on, but I will put them up in some of the next video, and as I go along, when I'm explaining some of the other steps that I'm taking, I'll be bringing up some of the game design documents for that. What we'll go on to now, though, is I'll actually show some of the add-ons that we're going to be using. So I'm just going to bring up Unity. So here you can see I've actually developed, I've already imported a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be using. So just in the top folder here, we've got our assets. I've actually set up a couple of folders already to help sort of lay out where everything is, because I find that especially when you're importing assets, they all come with their own folders. Some of them don't even come with folders. They just put that there's no top folder for them. They actually all just open up in the assets folder, and that can be really annoying because you'll lose track of where things are. So it's always good to just sort of sort and order your things. So I've started with 3 main folders, which are the art resources, modified resources, and then systems. And the way I've developed that is that basically all of the assets that I'm going to be using for art pieces are all going to be sorted into the art resources folder. Whenever I need to change something, or if I need to make like a new prefab, or if I need to modify something like that, I will put it in modified resources. And the reason that I do this is, as I was saying before, when there's going to be updates to things like say the main system, like the Invector template I'm using, when you modify something, if you go to update it again later, it will see that there's a difference between the updated version and the one that you've modified, and will often save over that in order to update your system, and then you'll lose all those changes you made. But if you can actually save them in another folder, so you can basically duplicate them in that, then you'll always have that copy there. And if you are updating, you might need to check about what's changed in there and how to fit your modifications back in. So anyway, I've got that folder there for the modified resources, and then systems. So I've basically split art. So this is all like the 3D models and all the imagery and everything that I'll be using for that. But the systems itself are the ones that, like the template system and any other plugins that I'm going to use. One thing I will say though is that with a lot of the add-ons that come through from Invector and Invector template itself, most of the scripts rely on being in the top folder. So the folder that they're in underneath assets. I've noticed that a couple of times when I've imported some of the community-made add-ons, when their scripts are trying to reference something from the Invector template, it needs to be in this top folder path here, otherwise it can't find it, and you end up with console errors that and you can't compile your game. So I've left the Invector template in this top folder here, and for the systems I've basically left them for in here. So some of the other systems that I'm using, I can put them in there, and they don't rely on the Invector, or they don't rely on any other template systems. So they're all self-contained. So I can put them in there, and then I know where to look for them later. This one here is actually the 6-score folder, so that's another Invector plugin system. And again, that has its own folder structure. I've left that there because when I move it around, it can play up. That's something that can actually be done, can be handled by the people that create the add-ons. There's ways around it. But yeah, I mean, that's something that's up to them. It doesn't really play too much with other things because I already know that I'm going to be using that, as that's the mainstay of my template. The mainstay of my game, so that can sit there, that's fine. The same as that. But then these other ones are good. Now I will go into which assets I'm going to be using. I've sorted them out into a folder, but I'm just going to pause the video there while I can bring up the folder and show you exactly what asset packs I'm going to be using for this demo. Alright, so here we go. So I've actually made a folder and I've moved all of the assets that I've grabbed out of the apps, the roaming data thing. When you buy assets on the asset store, it actually saves it to a hidden folder in your system, and it can be really annoying because then you have to go to the asset store to grab it. It's actually a lot quicker when you're dealing with a lot more assets to have them on a backup folder and then use that to put it through. Now I've actually sorted them out into, as I was saying, into separate folders as well, just so I can find where they are when I need them. So I'm going to start with the systems, because there's a few in there, and then I'll move on to the art. So as you can see here, I've got, for this project, I'm going to be using a few of these. We've got the third-person controller. I'm using the shooter version of that, because that'll allow me to do a lot of the spell effects that I want to actually push up there. So that's the Invector template. That's one of the base ones that we're going to be using, and basically the biggest package that we're using for that. I've also added in the durability add-on, which is by 6score, and that one there allows me to do item durability, so items can wear down, break, and be repaired, which is actually really cool, because in most RPGs you have a system like that. Not necessarily something that you need to have, but it is part of the game mechanics for the game that I'm planning. There's also the HUD waypoint add-on and the radar system. The HUD waypoint one's a little bit older now, and I don't think it was working properly with some of the other add-ons that I have. I'll look into that one as we go along, because that allows me to put little icons on the screen, like waypoint arrows and little markers and that on the screen to show you where to go. Because we're going to be dealing with quests, that sort of thing will be quite helpful. As well as the radar system. Now the radar system is more for if you're doing like a shooter or a Grand Theft Auto style clone. It'll pop up with a little mini map, and it'll do similar to the waypoint add-on. It'll actually have little icons that can point you in the directions that you need to go. So you can basically, you'll start a quest and you can just activate a little icon for that, and it'll point you which way to go. Yeah, so I'll look at both of those and I'll figure out which one best fits the theme that I want. But yeah, those ones I'll be adding in a little bit later, and we can see how we can pick from those at which one we want to go with. Another one I'm going to be using is this one here is a highly customizable door strip. This is actually deprecated from the web store, sorry, the asset store now. Here's one that you'll be able to get, but it's just a basic strip that allows you to have either levers that open the door, or just basically triggers that you could walk across that will automatically open doors. The Invector template actually has its own door opening script. You can basically interact with any item in the game. It's already got that built up as long as you've got the right animation for it. But this one here we may or may not use, but I've put it in there anyway just because it is one that I do like to use sometimes. On top of that, we've actually got Evil A's RPG pack for Invector. We got the latest build, which is the Beta 07. That'll be updated soon as well, with more features and a little bit of bug fixing. At the moment it works pretty well. You can actually open it up and it's got a full demo in there to explain how to do things. When you import it though, you do have to make some changes to the item enums listing, and then that'll help you play it properly. Also going to be using Fizz Sound and a Simple Physics Toolkit, magnet water and other effects. So these two here are actually really cool. Fizz Sound adds physical sound to objects in the game. So if you drop an item on the ground, every time it makes contact with the ground as a physical object, it will make a noise, and that noise will be based on the velocity, the power of the impact, and all sorts of physical aspects of dropping something. So it's cool because you can have things scraping along the ground without having to have a full scrape system set up. It does all that for you, and that's pretty cool. So that's something that I want to have in my game. Simple Physics Toolkit as well does the water and wind and magnetism. Actually has some really cool effects. I've used it before on the shooter by using like shooting out a sort of arcane bolt that actually sucks everything into it, kind of like in the second Thor movie where they have those grenades that cause the little singularity. So you can do effects like that with your weapons, which is really cool. So I've added that in there for the fun of it. Some of these other ones, so you've got the easy main menu. That's one that I'll be putting in a little bit later. That's another community add-on that's available on the Invector forums. That one there you can grab, and that gives you like a main menu system. It can also be used in any other game, but it does integrate with the Invector template, so that's pretty cool. One of the other things as well is we've got tools. So I've separated these. These are actually tools that I might use to do some of the background work. So I'm not actually importing them into my main game project. I'm going to be importing these into their own project because they allow me to fiddle around with other bits and pieces to create better things or to create other assets that I'm going to put back into the main project. So I've got the RPG Skeleton Army Editor Pack, that's by Adhering Games. That one there is a really cool pack because it has a whole lot of different skeletons and other things, bits and pieces that you can add on to create really individual characters. But with that, they're like a toon or like a hand-painted asset creator, so all of them will come out in the toon thing, which won't really match my aesthetic of the low poly that I've got. So that's where this mesh materializer comes in. So this is a pack that allows you to play with meshes and do all the low poly stuff, so you can actually minimize the meshes. You can join meshes together and create put several meshes into one single mesh, and all sorts of other effects. But it also, you can turn some of these other items or any other item into a low poly item. So I might be using a little bit of that to work with this icon creator. That's another good one, especially for an RPG thing where I'm going to have a lot of items and a lot of characters and whatnot. I want to get artwork for them, but I want that artwork to be based on the items themselves. So the icon creator allows me to use a 3D model, move it in a way that I like, and then have a little bit of 2D artwork over the top, and then push out in a batch form a whole bunch of icons that create for that. So when we're going through the menu systems and everything like that, you'll see I've got a lot of icons that are being created through this tool, and I'll show you how to use this tool as well to make those icons, and then that gives me all my 2D graphics that I need to navigate the menu with. Flat terrain's another one as well. It's like a low poly shader for terrain, so it turns the terrain into that real flat sort of blocky looking like low poly effect. Doesn't actually turn the terrain itself into a low poly terrain, but it's a shader that sort of shades it, so basically it displays it in a way that looks low poly. So I've used it a couple of times, and it's fairly effective, but I don't know how much terrain I'm going to be using in this one. It'll be a question of when I get to it, whether I actually develop my worlds with terrain or I use some of the 3D art assets and develop the terrains manually. But we'll have a look at that when we get to it. So they're the tools that I'm using for the project. So go back to here. Now we're going to get into the art. Now this is the big one. So when we open up, I've got a fair few things here. So the 3D items mega pack, that's one. That's actually a really good asset pack for a low poly RPG. It has something like just under 1,700 items altogether, and that's quite a lot. So you're looking at everything from swords, axes, two-handed swords and axes, wands, and technically staves as well. I'll show you how we manage that with those. It's also got shields. It's got other items too. So all your crafting items like so scissors and twine and that if you're going to be doing clothing. It's also got mining, so your pickaxes, and you've got your shovels and all sorts of other equipment that you would find in an RPG for crafting. Then you've got food, so if you've got crafting food or cooking food, you've got food items, and a few other like bits and pieces. There's even bows and arrows in it as well. So it's got everything you need to deck out a full-fledged RPG, which is absolutely fantastic. And basically it's got a collection of, so you'll have like a bunch of different sword designs, and they'll come in a bunch of different colours. So you can do tiered systems too. So you've got like a copper sword, you've got an iron sword, and you can do those sorts of progression systems. Another one I'll be looking at is also the AAA low poly forest. I got this one a while ago. It's definitely low poly, but it's the more you can do the more shiny side of the low poly, so it looks quite cool in itself. I'll be drawing some of the assets from that in order to help sort of deck out some of the environment. Same with the Ultra low poly assets. I think this one's actually deprecated. It was one of the Tornado Twins assets, I think it is, on the asset store. They've got a few other low poly sets on there, but this was one of the ones that they first brought out, and I grabbed it. It was just a couple of cool little bits and pieces that I was using for a demo back then. So again, I'll just be drawing on some of the low poly environment pieces from that. Hand-drawn modular icon set, again, that's just sort of, that's going to have this is a free pack, I believe. It's going to have a few 2D graphics that I can throw together on top of other things, so it's just cool little background stuff to have. Low poly Imperial Room props pack. This one's actually a really groovy stylized low poly pack with its own special vector shading system to give you a little bit of fun stuff to do with some of the artwork in it. Doesn't one-to-one match the aesthetic that I'm using for some of the main packs that I'll go on about down here, but I can draw bits and pieces from it to add to the environment that I've got. Same with the low poly nature pack light and low poly resource rocks. So the nature pack will have trees and rocks and things like that I might draw from. The resource rocks are like basically rocks with little gems sticking out of them in low poly form. So I'll be using those for part of the game because they'll obviously be harvesting, so mining with the pickaxe, things like that. Magic Arsenal. So this is a cool one. You can actually get a few different types of these. This one here is the straight Magic Arsenal, so it's the all the magic effects that you get from the normal one. They're sort of half toony. I have tried them out with the low poly stuff and they look like they fit, but there are more fitting low poly ones that will match the aesthetic, but this is the one that I own and it's pretty good, so I like using that. Another one, Medieval Interior Pack, low poly cartoon asset. So this one here is another interior pack. It's got all sorts of things like beds and inns and wood walls and all sorts of stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. I like some of those in there, and they're more of a match for the main assets that we're using, so I can get away with blending them into the area. But again, like this minimalist Christmas one as well, again it's low poly, so there's all sorts of presents and Christmas trees, and it's just something fun that I'll have in there that I can draw from to help deck out the interiors and use props. Same with the nature pack extended, you've got rocks, trees, things like that, all in that low poly form. Polypack Dungeons, Caves, Dungeons and Caves I think is the actual name of the asset. That one there, again, it's like all interior stuff, so you've got dungeons and cave environments, so I can draw bits and pieces from that to help flesh out the world when we do the level design. Now these four here are actually the main ones that I'm going to be drawing from, because this has all of the characters as well as the environments that come with them. So I've got the Adventure Pack, I've got the Knights Pack and the Pirates Pack, and I also just found out today they had a Fantasy Characters Pack, which really helps, because most of the characters from this are all very generic, whereas these ones here are your classic characters. So you've got your wizards, your witches, druids and bards and warriors. So that was actually a really cool pack, so I'm going to be using that for my main character now. Normally I was using one of the characters from the Adventure Pack and I just altered the colours on it, but now that's good. Another good pack from this, so the Adventure and the Knights Pack are fairly similar, but the Adventure Pack is more of like an adventuring village, people with tunics instead of armour, whereas the Knights Pack you have knights in armour and you have castles, but the environments are relatively the same. I think one of them comes with snow on top of stuff as well, so you can have snow versions. Actually, I think both of them do. The Pirates Pack is the big one though. The Pirates Pack is actually more expensive than the other ones, but it comes with a lot more stuff, including a couple of already made low poly skeletons that are animated. I'm not sure if the skeletons are animated, but it comes with sharks and fish as well. And it comes with all sorts of things, boats, pre-done buildings. It's got a lot more weapons in it too. It's got a few more of the handguns and the rifles that all fit the aesthetic really well. So yeah, the 3D items mega pack doesn't actually come with any guns or rifles, but these polygon packs do come with a couple of little blunderbuss handguns and a long arm for the Pirates Pack. And a couple of swords. I probably won't be using the swords. I might be using a spear if they got a spear in there, but otherwise I'll be using the resources from the Mega Pack for items in the game. So that one's actually a really good one to get. It's also got male and female characters, whereas I think the Adventure Pack doesn't have a female character. The Knights Pack has a couple of them, and the Fantasy Pack definitely has female characters as well, but the Pirates Pack was the first one that I got that actually had a set of female characters that are adventurers, more than just a woman in a dress. So that's good, because that just lets me sort of flesh out the world a bit more. I was a bit worried when I had the Adventure Pack that I didn't actually have female characters in the game, so I couldn't create female villagers or things like that. But now I've got a pretty random one, and these polygon ones are actually quite good quality packs as well, so they're definitely worth it. I think most of them are roughly around $19 US, I think, so they're quite good. But the Pirates Pack I think is $49, but there's just a lot more in the Pirates Pack, so it's a good one to have. Also they do simple FX cartoon particles, so again that's sort of like the Magic Arsenal one, which are all your particle effects and your fireballs and things, but this one here does them in the low poly stuff, so like just your things that would actually fit in the polygon thing. I'll probably be using them for things like blood spray and stuff like that come through. And then finally I've got the Wood and Stone UI pack. This was just a little UI pack that I bought, that I bought to fill out some of the UI that I've got on the game, just change it up from the basic standard one. Wouldn't say that it really matches the aesthetic of my game, but it's probably the closest that I've got on the asset store that I've seen anyway. We might actually change that later on in the development process if I get to something different, or if I start developing my own one. Anyway, so that's it. So they're the three different systems, three different folders full of art assets and so forth that I'm using. Yeah, so they're all the assets that I'll be using for this project. Now, you don't actually have to use these assets yourself for your project, and you certainly don't need them if you want to follow along with mine. A lot of those are mostly art resources that I'll be mixing in. You can get away with your own ones. You just have to substitute the ones that I'm using for whatever assets or resources you've got. I do actually recommend some of these ones, the Fizz Sound and the Simple Fizz, just because they are relatively cheap, I believe, and also they have a cool effect, which is sort of beyond my level of understanding to develop it myself. But you might know how to do it yourself, and you can throw in your own. And you also don't need them, they're really just for the fun effect of it. Anyway, so thanks for tuning into this part of this first video. I will be making a new video shortly, which will be about sort of setting up or starting out for actual development, and I'll be working in the Unity to make a little 3D environment. So yeah, there'll be something that you can show off to people, or something that you can look at for your game. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.